The issue of Hunter Biden is just ripping Joe Biden's heart out. And it is something he talks about with close friends. He worries about where is this going to go.
So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I want to thank you all. God bless you and God bless America. Thank you all for being in.
And you have to spin up the ball of thread before you can tell the story.
So I made a point the other day about people complaining about the pardon.
And now it's President Biden, not his successor, President-elect Trump, who is blaming his own Department of Justice for being politicized, saying, quote, "I also believe raw politics has infected this process and it led to a miscarriage of justice," unquote.
I want to lay out what your whine about the pardon has to incorporate.
The pardon sweeping, covering offenses that Hunter Biden, quote, has committed or may have committed or taken part in over the past 11 years.
Years is a very specific and not rounded amount of time.
Because a lot of people are forgetting how politicized, or maybe don't know. There's journalists like Caitlin Collin, Joe Scarborough, journalists over and over are going,
a statement like that at times sounded like something Trump himself could have posted on Truth Social.
Well, that's a problem with your journalism. That's a problem with CNN's journalism. If you find yourself incompetent to distinguish, to assess whether there was, in fact, political intervention in this case. So let's start with the fact that at the same time this investigation was going, Trump was withholding money from Ukraine to get dirt on Hunter Biden.
The Washington Post reporting that President Trump told his acting chief of staff, as I mentioned, Mick Mulvaney, to hold back almost $400 million in military aid for Ukraine at least a week before a phone call in which Trump is said to have pressured the Ukrainian president to investigate the son of a political opponent. That's according to 3 senior officials from the administration.
The perfect transcript, remember, one of the Vindmans said that it originally named Burisma and they took it off. After that, Rudy got on a plane and went and solicited dirt from a known Russian spy. And he did that with the foreknowledge of the White House and DOJ.
NBC News has confirmed that U.S. spy agencies have gathered intelligence that the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, was dealing with alleged Russian intelligence agencies late last year on a trip to Ukraine as part of his effort to dig up dirt on Joe Biden.
So this is what Rudy was allowed to do, even with the foreknowledge of the Attorney General. Rudy came back. Barr set up a way for Rudy to share that information he had gotten in part from a Russian spy and to ingest it into DOJ's coffers.
We had established an intake process in the field so that any information coming in about Ukraine could be carefully scrutinized by the department and its intelligence community partners so that we could assess its provenance and its credibility. And, you know, that is true for all information that comes to the department relating to the Ukraine, including anything Mr. Giuliani might provide.
Like a special side channel where Rudy Giuliani would face no legal repercussions for sharing it, but where Hunter Biden, if there was anything sustained about it, would. You've got Alexander Smirnoff, who in May starts saying, I think we can now say, I'm going to frame Joe Biden. I'm going to nail Biden with claims of bribery, which is, again, what Trump had been looking for since the previous November.
I wanted to just start by restating the obvious, which is that the impeachment investigation essentially ended yesterday in substance, if not in form, with the explosive revelation that Mr. Smirnoff's allegations about Ukrainian Burisma payments to Joe Biden were concocted along with Russian intelligence agents, and it appears like the whole thing is not only obviously false and fraudulent, but a product of Russian disinformation and propaganda. And that's been the motor force behind this investigation for more than a year.
We still to this day don't know how Scott Brady found Smirnoff. We don't know how he was tied to a Mykola Zlochevsky case that had been just shut down weeks before this whole project set up. But again, you have a longtime FBI informant who is allowed to lie to make allegations against Joe Biden, and that is kind of mainstreamed right into the investigation of Hunter Biden. And that is literally the most likely thing that led the plea deal to collapse in June of 2023.
Okay, I am sparing you the amount of Sean Hannity I could play you. For my sins, I watched about 30 minutes of monologues. But in his show, Fox host Sean Hannity alone promoted the claim of this single FBI informant no less than 85 times last year. 28 of those segments were monologues, very long monologues, in addition to all the breathless so-called reporting. And this is across the right-wing media. Hannity had House Oversight Committee Chairman and Chief Biden crime family investigator James Comer on as a guest 43 times in 2023. Today, James Comer and Sean Hannity's favorite informant, the smoking gun to their investigation, was arrested at Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas.
You have Trump literally calling up, after the laptop comes out, you have Trump literally calling up Barr and demanding more out of the investigation.
And he's got to act fast. He's got to appoint somebody.
He did the same with Jeffrey Rosen a couple weeks later. So you have Trump deliberately intervening in the case with the people at the top of DOJ. You have the House doing nothing with their majority that they won in 2022, except going through the motions of an impeachment so they can take this icky stuff from Hunter Biden and smear it on Joe Biden.
Piles and piles of documents, of bank statements, of emails, of text messages that we've worked very hard on in this committee over the last 8 or 9 months.
You have in the middle of that Bill Barr claiming that the Smirnoff allegation was good and should be investigated, and that was David Weiss's job the whole time.
I would have liked to see more coordination and more forceful engagement with the questions involving the Hunter Biden case. And does he think this is a fair and just resolution given the wrongdoing there? And also, more importantly, we need assurance that there was vigorous investigation of the other aspects, the financial aspects, and whether Joe Biden was involved in promoting his son's company and then sharing in the proceeds.
Well, that's exactly
the problem. And there are a lot of red flags there.
And so, again, that is probably one of the things that leads the plea deal to collapse. You have the GOP House literally intervening in Hunter Biden's docket to say, don't let this plea deal go forward. And when it didn't, they claimed victory for that.
Explain to me how this judge could actually go along with this agreement with all of that new information out there and available.
Well, she couldn't, and the judge did the right thing. Today was a victory for justice in America.
The disgruntled IRS agents similarly found a way to leak the entire case files from this investigation and then go public with it. And after that pressure, and after the threats against people involved in the investigative team, the plea deal fell apart, and they took credit for that, too.
Hunter Biden is suing the IRS, saying the agency unlawfully disclosed his tax information and failed to protect his private records. This has been filed days after Biden was indicted on a 3-felony gun charge, and we've also learned he also faces a potential tax charge again as well.
You have the prosecutor reneging on a plea deal. On June 19th, 2023, David Weiss's office told Hunter Biden's team that there was no ongoing investigation. And then as the plea deal fell apart July 26, 2023, basically a month later, all of a sudden, prosecutors are like, no, sorry, there is an ongoing investigation.
One other thing I would note is the fact that this does signal to us that the investigation is ongoing is really interesting, given the difference you saw in court between Hunter Biden's team saying, this is the end of the investigation, right? And the Department of Justice saying, no, it's not. And that was really the moment when those plea negotiations fell apart.
Again, that's probably their effort to chase down the frame job of Joe Biden. And again, no one has connected these dots, right? So they chase the frame job. They go discover that contrary to what Scott Brady had told Congress, Alexander Smirnoff's travel records were inconsistent with what he had claimed.
Nadler, a New York Democrat, wrote that it seems unlikely that Brady verified the information obtained from Smirnoff as he testified he did.
At this point, in September of 2023, I'm sure prosecutors were like, we just gave ourselves special counsel to go after this. So then they quickly charged the gun case, the Delaware gun case. And then, after the statutes of limitation expired on that 2018 gun purchase, then they collect the evidence that they're going to use to go prosecute it. This is insane. They first sent out this pouch that they found in Hunter Biden's truck. They first sent that out to be tested for drug residue in October 2023, after the statutes of limitation expired, which tells you that they had never planned to prosecute this gun case. They didn't get a warrant to search the laptop or any of his other digital files for evidence of drug use. They didn't get a warrant for that until December of 2023. It is insane. And yet, again, I'm the only one who reported on that. And it's proof, again, that this was all a response to the political pressure. The House claimed credit.
Wow, great job, all three of you.
Donald Trump said Hunter should be executed rather than get this plea deal.
Here's what Trump put on Truth Social. Weiss is a coward, a smaller version of Bill Barr, who never had the courage to do what everyone knows should have been done. He gave out a traffic ticket instead of a death sentence. Because of the two Democrat senators in Delaware, they got to choose and/or approve him. Maybe the judge presiding will have the courage and intellect to break up this cesspool of crime.
I wish that this pardon had not happened. I get why it did. I don't blame Joe Biden. I wish it hadn't happened because I think that the appeals would have been very productive and may have been very uncomfortable for Donald Trump. Just as one example, prosecutors prohibited Hunter Biden from showing that the gun shop owner doctored the gun form, the one he was found guilty of lying on, after the fact. So the gun form that was used in trial was not the original. Let me repeat that. The gun form that was used at trial was not the actual original that he filled out at the shop. It was instead the one that they sent off to ATF because that hid the fact that the gun shop owner and one of his employees doctored the gun form after the fact because they had not followed the law in selling Hunter Biden a gun. This raises questions like, why was Hunter Biden the one prosecuted and not the gun shop people? Very good question. And then the other thing that happened with prosecutors is I can tell you that Trump's efforts, the IRS agents' efforts, Congress's efforts led to threats against all the investigators because I've been able to review some transcripts from Jim Jordan's investigation. One thing in particular that we know is after the disgruntled IRS agents started coming forward, there was a meeting between David Weiss and the lead FBI guy where they said, how is this going to affect our case? And they said it's going to affect our case because our personnel are being followed. Not just our personnel, but their parents and their children are being followed. And so there was this response from the disgruntled IRS agents that led to real threats against the investigative team. And there was a discussion about that. And none of that made the Hunter Biden docket. Prosecutors who may or may not know that that happened because they weren't brought onto the team after the fact, they said, oh, there's no evidence that the IRS agents' public statements had an influence on the case. And I'm like, well, that's funny because that's not what the FBI agent, that the lead FBI agent testified to Congress. So there's all these things that are irregular about the case, and they should have raised alarm bells throughout the period that these things were happening. But again, in most cases, I'm literally the only one who reported on it. And everyone else was too busy chasing the salacious bits or describing what Gil Biden wore to the trial to cover the real basic nitty-gritty details of a legal case. And so those details should tell people like Caitlin Collins, who claims she doesn't know whether this was politicized or not.
I should note over Thanksgiving, some are arguing that he's undercut his own longtime claims that no one is above the law and his own pledges to restore independence to the Justice Department.
Those details are where you go to test the argument, and nobody in traditional media can rattle that off. And they all should be able to. This was the prosecution of the president's son, and those details should have been just as prominent as what Jill Biden was wearing to trial, but it never made the cable news.
You named Kash Patel to be the next FBI director. Yeah. He has a list in his book of 60 people that he calls members of the so-called deep state. It includes Democrats like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. It includes former members of your cabinet, from Bill Barr to Christopher Wray. You campaigned on destroying the deep state. Do you want Kash Patel to launch investigations into people on that list?
No, I mean, he's going to do what he thinks is right.
Do you think that's right? Do you think that's right, sir?
If they think that somebody was dishonest or crooked or a corrupt politician, I think he probably has an obligation to do it.
As we go forward, what's going to happen is Donald Trump and Kash Patel and Pam Bondi are going to target their enemies.
We have two great people there. We have him and we have Pam. And Pam Bondi has been like a rocket ship. She's very popular and very good and very fair. And Kash Patel is very fair. I'll tell you, I thought Kash may be difficult because he's, a strong conservative voice. And I don't know of anybody that's not singing his praises.
If we see happen what we saw happen with Hunter Biden or with Michael Sussman or with Igor Danchenko, where I'm almost the only one saying, wait, this case is trumped up, then it's very isolating.
Special counsel John Durham alleged Danchenko lied to an FBI agent when he said he hadn't, quote, talked to a Democratic political operative named Charles Dolan about the Steele dossier. Dolan gave Danchenko information that ended up in the dossier, but the two communicated via email. They didn't talk.
Hunter Biden's considered icky by everyone. And so no journalists care, with the exception of me and maybe 3 or 4 others, no journalists have given a fuck all about Hunter Biden's due process rights as the course of this carried out, because he's inky, right? No journalists, very few journalists, Charlie Savage did very good jobs with the Durham case, but few journalists cared about Igor Danchenko's due process rights. Few journalists cared about Michael Sussman's due process rights.
Durham was supposed to get to the bottom of all that and bring to justice any FBI employees who engaged in wrongdoing, and also to investigate members of the intelligence community who might have engaged in wrongdoing. In fact, in this case against Michael Sussman, the FBI was a victim, was an alleged victim of Sussman's lie, not the perpetrator of a crime.
So they were off going through hell without any attention on what it should have been, which is, God, this was really corrupt. God, John Durham's case is real dog shit. And if we continue forward on that path where people prosecuted by Donald Trump are presumptively treated as icky or presumptively treated as guilty, as happened with John Durham's targets, then we're in trouble.
Thanks for listening to Ball of Thread. To support this series and get answers to your questions with a bonus Q&A podcast, go to patreon.com/balloffthread. You can join us for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate your sharing this work with anyone who cares about the Constitution, and please consider giving us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts.